I'm going to invite our guests out one by one, and I ask you to hold your applause until they're all out on the stage, and just offer your presence and your heart to the stage as they're coming on. So our next session is titled The Power of Love, The Road to Healing in Parkland, Florida. Our guests will be interviewed by David Simas, the CEO of the Obama Foundation. And I'd first like to, in a moment, invite Fred Guttenberg out to the stage. His professional life includes over a decade of experience in sales and management with Johnson & Johnson, followed by almost 15 years as an entrepreneur. His 14-year-old daughter, Jamie, a freshman at Marjorie Stone Douglas High School, was one of the 17 victims brutally murdered in the Parkland, Florida school shooting. From that day forward, Fred's life would be forever changed. Fred now spends time challenging our elected officials to do more, and he is aggressively pursuing strategies to enhance public safety, enact common sense gun safety, and turn out the vote through his nonprofit organization dedicated to Jamie's life called Orange Ribbons for Jamie. He's been a regular on TV news programs and myriad of online and print media. Through the formation of the nonprofit, this is now his full-time mission. I'd like to invite Fred to the stage. You can just welcome him with your presence and your heart. Shelly Tygielski turned to teaching modern life mindfulness full-time after spending almost 20 years in corporate America immersed in Fortune 1000 organizations, and the past decade as a high-ranking executive in public and privately held companies. Within 2 days of the mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School on February 14, 2018, Shelly became heavily involved with the logistics organizing for the March for Our Lives movement and began to organize trauma workers and practitioners and bring mindfulness-based stress reduction courses and certification trainings to the community, as well as metta, loving kindness, retreats, and classes. With your heart and your presence, please welcome Shelly to the stage. Ivy Schamis is an award-winning social studies teacher at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, where she has taught for 18 years. On February 14, 2018, while teaching about how to counter hate groups on college campuses, a former MSD student shot and killed 2 of Ivy's students and wounded others. Despite this tragedy, Ivy continues to educate and inspire youth to make never again a reality. Please welcome with your heart and your presence, Ivy, to the stage. Adam Alhanti is a senior at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School and a survivor of the massacre that took place in February 14, 2018. Inspired to make sure that such a horrific act of terror never happens again, Adam assembled immediately after the occurrence with fellow classmates to call for stricter gun laws. Along with his fellow classmates, he was a key organizer for the March for Our Lives rally in Washington, D.C. The event was attended by over 800,000 people, and over 1.2 million participants across the globe joined in through sister marches. Currently, Adam is the Special Projects Director for March for Our Lives. Please welcome Adam with your presence and your heart. Aalayah Eastmond is a 17-year-old survivor of gun violence and student at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. She was a keynote speaker at the March for Our Lives rally in Washington, D.C. She bravely testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee at the Brett Kavanaugh hearing and told her story on national television. She is an executive council member of Team Enough, an intersectional, diverse, student-led organization that aims to prevent gun violence. Please welcome Aalayah with your presence and your heart. And she'll be followed by David Simas, who will be in conversation with them. There they are.
have a seat.
I'm already starting to cry.
I want to begin and stand, and then I will sit and join my colleagues here. First thing I want to say to everybody in the room is that you are all given orange ribbons. The orange ribbon comes from a story that I just heard Fred tell this morning about how his daughter, Jamie Guttenberg, her favorite color is orange. On the night after the mass murder in Florida, some of the people who danced with Jamie gathered on the floor of the dance studio and made orange ribbons. The orange ribbons then spread, where dancers and others throughout the country would wear the orange ribbon, and Fred and everybody only found out afterwards that it's also the color and the symbol of reducing gun violence. And so before we begin, and in the spirit of what this moment needs to be, I want everybody to just grab your hand and just touch that ribbon. Because from what you're about to hear from these people here on the stage, the courage and the experience of what they went through, this is a community that we have at this moment. And remember what we are hearing and from whom we are hearing it. I would like everybody also respectfully to treat this moment as if it were a meditation. Full awareness, full presence. And as an anchor for the discussion, please anchor not just on the words, but on the story and the feeling and the sentiment that you're hearing. Because these human beings are extraordinary, they're courageous. And the story that they're about to tell you and what they're about to share is something that I hope from this day forward for all of us, in ways big and small, we carry with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a tremendous honor to join all of you on this stage. And we spent about 2 hours this morning in a discussion about your stories and this moment. And so I just want to say, as I said in the back and I said this morning, you are among a community, you are among friends. The power of what you bring and how you bring it is a testament to your individual experiences. So we honor you for that courage, and thank you. On a personal level, as a father, as an American, and as a human being, I am just in awe and inspired by what you have done and what you have taken and what you are creating. So thank you for that. Let me begin in what is a conversation by, with your indulgence, going back to that day. February 14th, Valentine's Day, at your school in Florida. As much as you are comfortable talking about, as much as you're comfortable sharing, if you could describe what you saw, what happened, and then the path forward, or at least the initial stages from that. And I want to begin with you, Ivy. Ivy?
Okay, thank you. It was, like you said, David, it was Valentine's Day. It was a beautiful day. All the students were carrying around flowers and chocolates and balloons, and it was a joyful day. It was a Wednesday, and I was teaching in the 1200 building. The school it's a very large school with 3,300 students, and it is comprised of 13 different separate buildings. And I've been in 1200 building since it was erected. It's the newest building. It was up for 10 years. And so that class period, fourth period of the day, we're on block schedule. They're 90-minute classes just to set the picture for you. And I was teaching, I'm a social studies teacher, but that particular period was a history of the Holocaust class. And we were, as I was introduced, the students were finishing up a lesson that we had started the previous class where they were presenting hate groups that might be on their soon-to-be college campuses, because we know that young people are pretty vulnerable, and we wanted to explain maybe how to try to combat hate groups on your college campuses. And then we went on to learn about the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, because the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympics were going on at the same time. And so in order to bring the present into the classroom, we were talking about the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. And the students were watching on laptops the testimonies of people in Eyewitness is a program from the USC Shoah Foundation, and they were listening to some testimony and doing an activity on the computers. There was about 20 minutes left of class because it's a 90-minute class, and so, we shouldn't waste any time. I figured, let's start the next thing. So I put on the big screen a dot cam, and there were names of people that I wanted the students to know, because we were going to be talking about the Jesse Owens story. So I had up there Sam Stoller and Marty Glickman. They were Jewish athletes, track stars from the United States that were pulled out of the 400-meter relay at the last minute. And we had Larry Snyder, the coach of Jesse Owens, and Jesse Owens. And then we had a man named Adi Dassler. And I figured, let me just ask the kids before they start looking it up, who knows Adi Dassler? And they usually get a kick out of it after I tell them. But a beautiful young man in the class named Nicholas Dworet, he had just earned a swimming scholarship to the University of Indianapolis. And he raised his hand and he said, I know Adi Dassler. And we were surprised, and he said, that's the man who started the Adidas company. And he was not actually supposed to, he was a German shoemaker who ended up making Jesse Owens shoes because they never made it across the pond. So we were all surprised, and we said, wow, that's awesome. And I figured I'll just throw a fun fact in there. And his brother, Rudy Dassler, and he knew that that was the Puma shoes. And the whole class was pretty impressed and surprised at that. And at that very second that he answered that, and the class all turned around and said, wow, like, how do you know that? We heard deafening sounds out in the hallway. And I'm not a gun person at all, but it was unmistakable that those loud sounds were gunshots. And the students looked at me, and I looked at them, and we flew out of our seats. And people were scrambling to all corners of the room, and the room had no walk-in closet, literally nowhere to hide. And we've talked about this before because we knew there'd be an active shooter drill at some point. And I truly didn't know where to tell them to hide. So students were scrambling all over, and one young lady called me over, and we were crouched down in the corner, and within seconds, and at the time we didn't know who it was, but now we know it was a former Stoneman Douglas student, was shooting a barrage of bullets right through a glass panel that went through the center of the door, and that panel went right down to the handle. So although the door was locked, it could have been quite easy once you shot through that glass to open up the door. So we're scrambling to the ground, and bullets are flying through the classrooms, and one young man he was taping it on his phone. He was recording it on his phone because he thought, what a crazy drill, I'm going to show my parents. And when the bullets went flying through, I guess we knew it was not a drill. And I look over to my right, and I see Sid Fisher, a young man in the class, he whispers to me, Mrs. Schamis, are we going to die today? And I said to him, no, not today. I actually didn't cry, though I'm crying now, but I said, nope, not today. And I look over to my left, and I see Daniel Zafrani reciting the Shema, although the class had many different types of students, every race and religion and nationality. This young man happened to be Israeli. And he's doing the Shema, which is the prayer that people do before they die. And so I had a view of the door, and I was just waiting for this whoever, I didn't know if it was one or several people, to put his hand through that glass and open the door. And now, had he done that, I don't think I would be here to tell you any of this, because from what we found out later, this young man was a hater. He had swastikas on his backpack, and when you walk into my glorious room that I used to call my happy place, it was no doubt a Holocaust history class, because there were posters, and I had a giant yellow banner in the back of the class that said, "Never forget." And so I thought, I'm going to have to do something, because I can't just crouch here on the floor. So I was planning in my head, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say, "I love you." Because this person had so much hate in their heart. Maybe no one ever said, "I love you." And so I'm just going to say, "I love you," and maybe he won't shoot us. But I didn't get the chance, because he then moved on to the next room. And so that's pretty much my story, except that, come to find out, he had injured several students in the class, but Nicholas Dworet, my star athlete, was killed that day. And a beautiful young lady named Helena Ramsey, who I had as a 9th grader, and then I had again as 11th grader, she traveled with us. We took students to London, Paris, Barcelona. She was British. And in the beginning of the year, when they introduced themselves and why they took a history of the Holocaust class, she was one of the few students that thought that hate one day in this world could be eradicated.
Ivy, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Aalayah, you were in Ivy's classroom, room 1214.
Yes, I was in Ms. Shamis's classroom. I just remember presenting the projects on hate groups, and Nicholas was actually a partner in my group. And we just presented those projects and then began working on computers. And then I remember hearing those loud pops, and I've never been around guns, so I didn't really know what that was. And I remember the whole class pausing, and then we heard it again, and that's when we immediately moved. And I remember half of the class went to one corner where we're supposed to go, out of view of the window that's in the classroom door. And the other half of us ran to the other corner, which is in complete view of the window, which wasn't the safe corner, and I ran to that corner. And I just remember sitting there, and half of us thought it was a drill, because we were supposed to have an active shooter drill. So we were just sitting there waiting, not really knowing what was going on. And then as I went to call my mom, that's when he started shooting into the classroom. And I was still telling myself, there's no way that this is actually happening. This has to be a senior prank. And I saw red on the floor, and I was still telling myself, this has to be from a paintball gun. It can't possibly be anything else. And I looked up, and I saw Helena Ramsey slumped over on the wall. And that's when it hit me that she was dead. And as soon as I noticed her is when Nicholas Dworet, right in front of me, fell over. And it was a moment of life or death. And I immediately followed every movement of his body, and I just laid underneath him and began talking to God, because at that point I genuinely thought I was going to die. And I told him, just please make it quick. I don't want to feel anything. And I just laid there, and I looked at the floor, so I knew when to hold my breath when the footsteps would come closer to me, because I thought the shooter would come into the classroom. And I'd say I was laying there for about 10 seconds, and then he moved on to the next class. And I remember rolling Nick off of me and placing his head on his arm so he wouldn't be touching the floor. And I sat up, and my other classmates pulled me behind a filing cabinet, and that's when it really hit us, and so many other people were shot. And that's when I called my parents. I told them my last goodbyes. And then my classmate Samantha Fuentes, who was shot several times, I gave her my phone to call her mom, but she saw her reflection in my phone, and her eye was swollen. So I remember taking my phone back away from her because she started getting loud, and I texted her mom for her to make sure that her parents knew that she was okay. And I continued calling my mom and my dad, and everybody in the corner was on the phone with 911 and their parents. And it was just complete chaos and confusion. But we knew we had to stay quiet. So we just sat there, and we were on our phones getting help. I'd say what felt like 2 hours maybe 6 or 7 minutes went by, and the SWAT team finally came in and evacuated us. And I just remember walking for hours and not being able to see my mom because all of the roads were shut down. And I finally saw someone that I knew, and I just said everything that happened to me. And they noticed a bunch of body matter all over me and in my hair. So that's when the police started picking the things out of my hair and then took me back to campus. Still unable to see my mom, they made me change into this biohazard suit, and then 2 hours later took me to the Marriott where I finally saw Miss Schamis again. And around 8 p.m. that night is when I was finally able to see my mother, and that's what happened on February 14th.
Aalayah, thank you.
Thank you.
Adam, you were on the campus, but in a different building, and so even though you were there, the experience is slightly different. If you could share what you experienced.
Yes, so I'm in a theater technical production class, and we were in the auditorium that period, working on some lights and fixing some equipment, and that's when the fire alarm went off. The bullets and the gunpowder from the gun set off the fire alarm, and that was our second fire drill, I guess, or fire alarm going off that day, so we all assumed that it was another drill. We had one that morning, and so we weren't as quick to exit the building when an announcement came on that said code red, evacuate the building. That actually is a code word for students not to evacuate the building. Code red means active shooter. So our plan when there is an active shooter is not to evacuate the building. So they tell us if they go on the announcements and say code red, evacuate, that means not to evacuate. And so because the fire alarm was blaring, we could not hear code red. All we heard was evacuate the building. So my friends and I, thankfully I was with my two best friends. We exited the building into the parking lot, and that is when a fellow student screamed out, everyone back inside, and from then on it was pure madness, confusion, and terror. I went back into there's a band hallway which happens to be right next to the building where everything happened, and in about, I have to say 30 seconds, we were all cowered under instruments and instrument cases and cabinets, kind of fighting for a good spot, I guess, and waited there for about 2 hours. And we were right next to the parking lot, and you could hear sirens, and the whole time we kept thinking that it was a drill. This is just a drill, because like Ms. Schamis and Aalayah had said, we were told that coming up there would be a drill. So the whole time it was, this is just a drill, this is just a drill. And when it became a reality for me was when I heard an officer say that we need a gunshot wound kit on his radio. And that is when I started to face reality. I would go on my phone and see on Twitter helicopter aerial shots of my school. The president at the time was tweeting about it. And that is when it became a reality for my friends and I. Soon later, we were evacuated. And like Aalayah said, the streets were blocked, so we were walking, and just walking and walking, and we would pass triage tents where they would be taking out scalpels and different medical equipment. And it just seemed like an endless walk to where our parents were waiting for us.
Adam, thank you. Fred, tell me about that day.
I remember every detail of that day with the exception of one. And it's the detail that I don't remember that haunts me. It was Valentine's Day. My brother, I told you earlier, had passed away 4 months earlier from cancer related to his service in 9/11. And I was struggling with what happened to my brother. And after a few months of that, I was actually really looking forward to Valentine's Day as a day for us as a family to just enjoy a day. My daughter was 14, my son was 17. I wanted my daughter to have this beautiful romantic day. And so the day before, I've never told this story before actually, I bought all of this equipment to convert my wedding video to a DVD format so that we could actually that night watch it as a family. And I was looking forward to that evening, and I still had work to do on it that day, so I wanted my kids to get out the door and go to school so I could get to work on my plan. But my kids were running late that morning, which is not atypical. What I remember about that morning is the chaos of the morning and my kids running late and me trying to rush my kids out the door. You gotta go to school, you gotta go to school, go. I don't to this day remember if I said to my daughter the very last time I saw her the words, "I love you." It will haunt me forever. And I will tell everyone in this room, make sure every second you get, you tell those you love that you love them, because it could be the last. You do not know. And I don't remember. I sent 2 kids to school that day. Only one of them came home. So from that point forward, that day went off like any normal day. My kids, they have their cell phones. They're in constant contact with us. Everything was going fine until just after 2, when my son calls me. And he says, "Dad." And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Dad." And my son was a bit of a joker, so usually that's how he would start off, by telling me something that he just wanted to mess around with me on. He goes, "No, I'm serious this time." I'm like, "What's wrong?" He goes, "There's a shooter at my school and I can't find Jamie." And when he said that, I knew he was serious because he watched his sister like a hawk. And I said, "Well, what are you doing right now?" He goes, "I'm running." He was not in the same building. And I said, "Hang up, you keep running." A minute later, he calls me back. And I'm like, "Run." And he's like, "I am, but I hear bullets." I'm like, "You keep running as fast as you can. You get off the campus." Now, here's what you need to know. Those bullets that he was hearing were the ones on the 3rd floor that were killing his sister. The way the building was set up was 3 levels. The first level, after all the shooting, the fire alarm went off. And nobody died on the 2nd floor, because on the 2nd floor, it seems they heard the shooting, but on the 3rd floor, they did not. So when the fire alarm went off, the kids on the 3rd floor and the staff exited. They were on their way out the building when the shooter started making his way up the steps. And they all started running back up. Unfortunately, my daughter did not make it back into a room. A lot of reasons why, locked doors and things like that. But she didn't make it back into a room. And what's horrifying about it, beyond everything I've already told you, is there's video of what happened to my daughter because it was in the hallway. And my daughter died running down the hallway. She was the second to last to be shot. She made it to within 1 second of surviving. She made it to the stairwell on the other side and was turning in. Guy with an AR-15 at her back, chasing, and she makes it to the stairwell. If she turns into the stairwell 1 more second, she's alive. Instead, boom! A single shot severed her spinal cord. To this day, I don't know if my daughter suffered. They tell me she probably died instantly. I'll never know. This image of my daughter running down that hallway is what has forced me to take the action that I do today. I can't stop. This image of my daughter on the ground, possibly alive and suffering and not able to reach out to anybody, I can't get it out of my head. It's in my head every second of every day. And if anybody has seen some of the news stories since that show photos of the third floor, especially after the MSD commission, and there's a black oval over a body by the stairwell, that's my daughter. It's the last picture of her that was ever taken. So if anybody wants to know why I do what I do today, that's it in a nutshell. Following the shooting, I'm on the phone on and off with my son, and my wife and I are panicking because we haven't heard from our daughter. Now, my daughter, if her shoelace became untied, she would have texted my wife to report it. They just were constant contact. And so when we weren't hearing anything, we were panicking. We were hoping maybe she left her phone and just ran without it. Eventually, I was able to get through all the police activity and fire activity, and I picked up my son. He ran to a Walmart, and he was able to ping her phone. We knew it was still in the room. So I was hoping, or on the floor, that maybe she dropped it. But one by one, all of her friends started to call their parents. Now, during this time frame, my wife was also on lockdown. My wife is a pediatric occupational therapist, and she was working at a private school seeing clients, and it was right near the high school. So she was on lockdown at that school, and she couldn't leave. But between she and I, we keep on trying to reach my daughter, texting, calling. One by one, kids keep calling their parents. We hear nothing. By the time every one of Jamie's friends had called their parents, the police and all and all the law enforcement were saying, go to the Marriott Hotel. That's where they're going to drop all the kids and provide news updates. My wife and I chose not to do that. We chose to go to the hospital. We knew if my daughter was going to be able to communicate, she would have. So we got to the hospital, and her dance team and dance instructor went to the Marriott Hotel instead for us, just in case, God willing, she came off on a bus, which she didn't. And we went to the hospital, and after about an hour and a half there, they had no record of her there, and they checked all the other hospitals, no record. So one of my very best friends is a SWAT officer that was on the campus. And when I left the hospital, I called him and I said, you got to go back and look. So we did. And it took us about 40 minutes to get from the hospital back to my community. A lot of traffic, all the roads were shut down. It was pretty bad. But somewhere along the way, as I was on the highway, he called me. And he says, meet me at the Marriott. And I said, why? He goes, just meet me there. We'll talk there. And I said, no. I said, just what is it you want to talk about? And I said, do you know something? I said, I can hear it in your voice. And he broke down, and he told me she was gone. Now, my wife and I were in two cars because we came from different places. And when we left the hospital, she was in the car in front of me. I was just one car behind her. But she keeps looking in her rearview mirror, and she could see I was on the phone, and she could see I was getting very emotional. So now my wife calls me, and she's like, what's going on? And I said, nothing. We're going to meet Scott at the Marriott. She's like, no. I can tell there's something up. But I didn't want to tell her because she was driving. And I said, nothing. She's like, tell me what's going on. I said, pull off the side of the road. And on the side of the highway is where I told my wife that my daughter was killed. My daughter became the first publicly identified victim that day. And of course, as you start notifying people, it ends up on social media. So within 30 minutes of all that, helicopters flying over my house, the phone ringing with the news reporters, they were showing up at my door. Fortunately, I did have a lot of friends who were police officers, and they ended up planting themselves in front of my house for the next 5 days to keep all that away. But February 14th, I had to start dealing with the reality that I was going to bury my 14-year-old daughter. I was numb. We stayed home for a while. People came over. But at some point, we told everyone to leave, and my wife and I and my son decided, probably around 10 o'clock that night, that we needed to go be with all the other families at the Marriott, who didn't know anything yet. No other family had anything confirmed yet by this point. But it was just where we felt like we belonged. And that day changed my life forever. The following day, there was a big vigil on February 15th that evening, and I decided to go. I just felt this need to be with the community. I didn't know what to do. My wife didn't go, I did. And I got there, and the mayor asked me if I wanted to speak. And that night, for me, became the start of my public life. I remember going up and it came from my heart and my head. I hadn't written anything, but talking about being broken. And I remember while I was up there, it hitting me. My family, my community, we were victims of gun violence. And I remember standing there that night, not really sure what this meant, but I knew I meant it, saying, this time they messed with the wrong community and the wrong dad. And I hope the gun lobby is realizing a year later they messed with the wrong community and the wrong dad. So. One of the powerful and central anchors of story, as we discussed earlier, is that while the pain and the story of what you, Ivy, saw in that classroom, what you, Aalayah, saw, Adam, what you experienced as you came out, and Fred, the individual memories of each specific day will be with you for the rest of your lives. And one of the things that's challenging is that for the first week or two afterwards, when the helicopters are there, everybody else's attention is focused. Then the helicopter goes away. The interview stops. The fear that a parent has in the immediate wake of Newtown or Columbine or Parkland of dropping their son or daughter, their grandchild, their niece or nephew off. A week goes by, 2 weeks goes by, 3 weeks goes by, and it begins to dissipate. The only way that it doesn't dissipate
is when you do things like this. Because then Jamie is not an abstraction. None of your stories are abstractions. And even while you do that, I think we need to be very mindful of the toll that it takes on an individual. And the next question I want to ask you is about the healing process. And you can define it however you want. And Shelly, this is important for you to engage on this also. Based upon what you saw and what happened to you, tell me briefly about the healing process and how you engaged and wrestled with it deeply. And, I'll turn it over to anyone to go first.
I just want to pick up on what you said about telling people because, again, I'm closely connected to Holocaust studies and Holocaust survivors, and the one thing that I take with me all the time, even before the shooting, but a Holocaust survivor said, pain should not be wasted. And I think about that a lot now, especially since it came to us. But all that pain that you feel from whatever it is, in our case, this shooting, you need to share that. And you can't really start that healing unless you share. So giving us this opportunity to share with you, because everything that I worked for my whole professional career is in room 1214. We're not allowed to go back in that building. And so it stands there as a reminder every day. And I had to start anew, and we're in portable classrooms for now. And when you walk out my door of my new classroom, I put up a new poster. It's a giant poster with Elie Wiesel saying, once you hear a witness, you become a witness. And so you have to continue to tell those stories so the pain's not wasted.
And Ivy, as a teacher, you felt an additional responsibility, which even while you were having the memory of that moment, when you were going to the vigils and to the funerals, in terms of your healing process, you had another hurdle that you had to overcome. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I was, like I told them before, I was captain of my ship, and so I had to be the strong person for the students. I had to be the one to make them feel that it's going to be okay.
And Aalayah, you saw Ivy, and you and the rest of the students actually told her that it was okay.
Yeah, we were actually at Nicholas's funeral, and that was my first time seeing her break down, and I just remember her apologizing, and we were all like, it's okay, we're all human, we're all in this together, and of course we're gonna have so many moments where we all just break down, and it's great that we're breaking down together so we can heal together through this group of emotion and confusion, because it's still so much for one person to have to deal with, let alone a whole community at one time. So we just told her that it's okay. She doesn't have to be this strong person for us. We just have to do this together.
And Ivy, one of the things that you experienced, as you described, a shyness, until your mom told you about a responsibility that you had. Yeah. Talk about that.
Yeah, I kind of was shy before this happened. I didn't really want to speak out, but I remember having a conversation with my mom the day after, actually, and she told me that my story could possibly save so many other lives. And at that moment, I was like, that's so true, because not a lot of people think the way I thought in that moment to do something like that. So when she told me that I could save lives, that's when I was like, I'm definitely going to speak out. And a few weeks later, we actually had another conversation. And then at that moment is when she brought up my uncle, her brother, who also died to gun violence 15 years ago. And that's when I got another connection, and I realized that I wasn't only impacted on February 14th, but I was impacted 15 years ago by losing my uncle. So then that was another thing put on my shoulder so I can represent marginalized communities that also go through gun violence on a daily basis. So those are the conversations that I had with my mom that really pushed me to speak out.
And Adam, you were describing essentially from the moment that the shooting occurred, you and your friends, you wanted to do something and you kept busy. Tell me about how the moments when you weren't busy and when you essentially needed to reflect and what that meant to you.
Of course. So, I was based in someone's house for about 2 weeks, day and night, with about seven or eight, other individuals, and it grew to 20 of us. And so basically, we were in HQ out of someone's living room day and night, and my parents were wondering where I was, and I told them that I was just working, and that's what it became was work. So day and night we were working to organize in a march on Washington that we didn't even know how to organize. So when we weren't so busy, and I forgot to mention this before, and now it's coming to me, is that when we weren't busy, we had each other. And a central theme that has come out of this is that in high school, you have your cliques. You have the kids who are in band, the kids who play sports, the theater kids. And out of this was a group of individuals, and each and every single one of them were from a different group or clique in high school. That's what we refer to them. And there was someone from every background and every club and whatnot. So we all shared this unfortunate bond together. And I have people who I'm closer with now that I never even spoke to prior to February 14th. So when I wasn't busy and when we weren't working, we had each other to cry on each other's shoulders. These people that we barely even knew became our best friends in a matter of weeks. And so although we were facing such a terrible tragedy, and we were trying to work towards a positive outcome, there was still this, we were still going to funerals, 2 a day we were going to funerals, and it was still there, but we had one another to rely on, and we were all going through it together.
And Fred, you talked about something very similar that Adam just described, about 17 families. How did that affect you?
So February 14th, I found myself part of a club that never expected to be a part of, with 17 other families, and didn't know them beforehand. But I've grown to love them. We don't all agree on everything, but that's fine. We didn't know each other before, but on a personal level, we all need each other now. And they have been a very necessary part of our path forward. My wife and I, and the other families always talk about how much we hate the fact that we know each other, but we love each other anyway. When we're together with them is probably as normal as we can ever feel, because we don't have to work off of ceremonies. There's none of the, how are you doing today? Are you doing better? And so together we've gotten through this, and we are all grieving differently in my own house and amongst the 17 families. And I think for me, probably the best lessons on grief came from Vice President Joe Biden, who spent way more time talking to me than I ever could have imagined he would have, and talking to me about grief, about how people go through it differently, but can still go through it together. Talk to me about mission and purpose. He gave me the roadmap for the past year. And it has been such an important part of my doing what I do. And when I think about the 17 families, and I think about just my family, we're all going through things differently. And we're all having different moments. What makes those 17 families even more important is sometimes when we go through our moments, that's who we reach out to now. Grief is unpredictable, and it hits you at weird times. And I was telling you a story earlier. Early March, and I remember this, it was the day the Florida House was voting on gun safety legislation. And I was actually in DC that day. And it was my first day in DC post February 14th. And the first person I was going to meet with was Senator Rubio, who, for those of you who saw the CNN town hall, we had an interaction. So, the thing about that morning, though, is it almost ended before it began. My daughter, my kids had access to my phone. It was just like, even if I would have tried to put in a code, they would have figured it out in 2 seconds, so it wasn't worth it.
Should have hacked it.
So, my daughter put on my calendar on random days throughout the year this thing called Love Jamie Day. And Love Jamie Day for Jamie and I was like Valentine's Day on steroids. And I never knew when it was going to come up. Well, that morning in DC, as I'm getting ready to go meet with Senator Rubio, Love Jamie Day popped up on my calendar. And I kid you not, my day almost ended before it began. I was a mess. And then I started to think about my conversation with Vice President Biden and mission and purpose. And I kind of dried my eyes. I took a few deep breaths. I pulled myself together, and I marched on with my day. But now I make a habit of always looking ahead in my calendar to know when Love Jamie Day is coming. I will never delete them, but I'll always know in advance.
Fred, thank you. Shelly, thanks. Shelly, tell me about the community that you found and then the work that you began.
Sure. So on February 14th, I was, like many of you, wearing many different hats. I'm a mom to an 11th grader who goes to school just about 15 miles, whose school was also on lockdown that day. So that's how I first found out about the shooting, or that there was a lockdown. And I'm a community organizer. I was the area leader for the Broward Democratic Party at the time. I had just come off of being a co-chair for the Florida Women's March the month before, the 1-year anniversary. And I also lead a meditation community in Broward County every Sunday morning. It's just a really large group of people that meet on the beach of Hollywood. And so for me, there was no distinction between the me and the we. My default mode, so to speak, is immediately community. And so when all of the things started to unfold and we learned more and more about what was happening on the news, people started to text me and say, what are we going to do? Are you doing anything? Are we doing anything? Where are we going to meet? And so I thought to myself, like, we have to do something. So the first hat that I put on was my community organizer / pissed off mom hat.
It's a dangerous combination.
Yeah, totally. And I immediately put up a Facebook event for a march, which was originally supposed to be on March 14th. And as the March for Our Lives started to unfold, those marches were eventually combined and everything was turned over to the students. But through that process, I met an incredible woman named Samantha. Can you stand up for a second, Sam, please? If it wasn't for Sam, none of us would be sitting here today talking to you. Thank you, Sam. And so Sam was kind of the behind-the-scenes, back-of-house adult liaison for March for Our Lives Parkland. And Sam and I wound up communicating, and I started to send her information about mindfulness and about healing and just finding kind of presence and creating space for people. And the next hat that I decided to put on was as a meditation teacher. So I heard a beautiful explanation or a kind of a quote on grief, which I shared with you yesterday, David, was, grief is just love with nowhere to go. And so I thought to myself that if I could channel my love and if I could teach others to channel through a practice like metta, loving kindness, where they can maybe start placing their love, that perhaps those experiencing, whether it's primary trauma or secondary trauma, could start the journey to healing. And so, you know, we have this incredible community now that we've formed, and we're planning really great and amazing things.
That even Fred is going to go to.
Yes, that even Fred is going to go to. Do you want me to just share about it?
Because if you do share,
Yeah.
now he has to share.
Yes, okay, so Fred's going to join me. So one of my teachers is Sharon Salzberg, who I hope is watching. Hi, Sharon.
Hello, Sharon.
Sending you a lot of love. And Sharon, as you know, has a really big heart. And there's no better teacher for the Parkland community than Sharon, because she's experienced her own tragedies. And so Sharon and I were corresponding, and she said, what I really feel for the Parkland community, I feel for these students, they're incredible, they're wonderful, what can I do? I want to do something. And that's when Sam and I met at a deli and had a conversation, and I said, there's this incredible woman that you have to meet, and we've got to bring her here. She's willing to come on her own dime and fly down and hold a retreat. Let's do it. And Sam said, yeah, let's do it. And we did. We put together a half-day out-of-residence retreat, and we invited anybody from the Parkland community or anybody that was experiencing trauma, and we did have parents there and students there, and Ivy was there, and it was incredible. But what came out of it was afterwards, really, when there was kind of a small gathering of us, and one of the parents, Nick's dad, Mitch, who's amazing, just an amazing human being, asked me about wanting to do more. How can I learn more? How can I do more? Where can I kind of attend to more of this? And that's when Sharon and I started talking on the drive back from this incredible experience, and we decided that we wanted to hold a retreat, an in-residence retreat at Insight Meditation in Barre, Massachusetts. And so on August 5th, we're going to be holding a 4-day retreat with Fred. And it's going to be for parents and for teachers. And then a few months later, we're going to be holding one for students. And we're not stopping there, because what's happened is that what Mitch has shared with me is that, unlike what Fred shared, there's the 17 families that have this undeniable bond over this tragedy. There's this other kind of link between all the other mass shooting victims around the country, whether it's a Tree of Life, or whether it's in Aurora, or Sandy Hook, or Columbine. And it's like being in a room with somebody who can only understand what you're going through, right? And so we recognize, and it's unfortunate to say, but there have been mass shootings since Parkland. And it's not really a question in our society today if there's going to be another mass shooting, but rather when. And so we want to create this space where there's a quarterly or maybe monthly gathering for mass shooting victims who want space to heal away from the chaos that many of you experience on a daily basis, and to be able to just come to seek empathy, silence, and also just authentic love.
Thank you, Shelly. In the final few minutes that we have together, I just would like each one of you to say what you would like all of us to take away from this extraordinary time together in the space that we have created, and the powerful voice and courage that you have shown. What do you want us to really reflect on as we leave here? And let me begin with Aalayah, who is now, partially because of her mom who is here. Mom, can you stand up also?
Yay!
Aalayah is now a powerful voice who told me earlier she wants to go to college, and after she graduates from college, wants to be a public defender so she can be a voice for those that don't have one. Aalayah, what should we take away from you?
I think a lot of people focus on always being strong, and I'm guilty of that. And I think it's important for us to realize that we are all human, and we do have times where we aren't so strong, and we do have to take a step back and really focus on our mental health. So I definitely want you guys to just realize that it's okay not to be strong 24 hours of the day. And although most of you guys might have kids, it's okay to just be honest with them sometimes and let them know how you're truly feeling, because you don't always have to be strong all the time. And I feel like it's better for others to see you really for who you are and how you feel, rather than mask it and try to be strong at all times. Because I am guilty of doing that when I'm at events like this, always being so strong and not really showing my emotions. But I realize that that's not who we really are, and it's important for us to share our emotions and be honest with those around us.
Thank you, Aalayah.
Amazing.
We'll turn it over to Adam, and Adam's dad, I believe, is here. Could you stand up? Adam also wants to go off to college, and where Aalayah wants to be a voice for those that have none, Adam wants to focus on communications and message so that the stories that we are conveying to people are done in an impactful way that can begin to change society. Adam, what do you want to leave with us?
Well, I often tune my message to the audience that I'm speaking in front of. And one of the themes that I've noticed at this conference is being able to connect with one another in the moment. And, as you do that, I hope that you also understand one another instead of just connecting. In addition, you also begin to realize where people are coming from with their ideas and their beliefs. And, we live in an age where politically it's hard for one another, for us, one another to understand, where someone else is coming from. So as you speak to people, or if you see someone wearing a shirt or a hat that you might not agree with, you understand where they are coming from, because this world, although we think is so small with technology, it is not. It is massive, and there are so many different ideas and beliefs, and sometimes it's okay to just realize that not everyone's going to agree with you.
Thank you.
That's so good.
Ivy, I have to say, so Ivy's husband is here. If you could stand up. Now, Ivy's husband has a name, but because he has attended so many different gatherings with her, he goes now by Prince Philip. Ivy, what would you like to leave with us?
First of all, the students are incredible. Those are two of the type of students that we have at Stoneman Douglas. They are just fabulous. They are. I'm telling you what I see on a daily basis. And I know, and I'm proud of all of the movements that have come out of this horrible tragedy. And there are so many people standing up for gun reform and mental health reform and school safety. My platform is and always has been and always will be education. And I know that we can't always be, the strongest. We teach our kids to be not bystanders, but upstanders. It's a great term. We use it all the time in Holocaust class. You should use it as well. We want to be upstanders and do the right thing. But the one message I think that I leave you with is that even though we can't always be strong all the time, we can all be stronger than hate.
Shelly?
So I have two quick things. The first is really for all of you. There are so many practitioners, teachers, and I would encourage you that when there is a tragedy or trauma or something that happens in your community, we tend to be those bystanders and or to be in shock, of course. But I would encourage you to really dig deep and to maybe not run away from the tragedy, but run to it. And just figure out a way to be there and to help and to offer the gifts that you have, just the love that you have in your heart, because it's bigger than all of us. And the second thing I want to say is that I really want to reclaim the color red back because it's been taken away from us. So this is my message to everyone. Let's make America kind again. And so I brought this shirt for you. And if you look underneath the hashtag, and Sharon's going to be mad at me, but I don't care, it says Sharon 2020.
Sharon, I owe you one. Thank you, Shelly. And now the final word for Fred, and while they are not here, I know that you have a son.
I do.
You have a wife, and the three of you, I love the way that you don't refer to Jamie in the past tense. You refer to her in the present tense. So, final word from you.
Yeah, Jamie is my daughter. She's not with me physically, but as parents, we react to what happens to our children. And I've spent my past life still being Jamie's dad and reacting to what happened to Jamie. I will always be Jamie's dad, and I will never stop reacting to what happened to Jamie. So, which gets to the two things I want to say. One is, boy, one thing I've learned is we have levels of resilience that we don't know until we're tested. I look back in my life now and I think about the gazillions of moments that I thought, oh, this is the worst. It can't get worse than this. I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And I think back about how many of them I can't even remember what they were. And I can tell you this was the worst. Nothing before it compares. But we're marching forward. I have a mission. And the lesson from this is there's nothing that we can't march forward from, especially if we do it with others and love. And that gets to point number 2. I will be forever haunted by that morning and not being able to remember if I told my daughter I loved her. I will never, ever, ever be able to get that out of my head. And so I ask all of you, every chance you get, to those who you're with, you look them in the eye and you always tell them, I love you, in the eye, and mean it. Because it could be the last time. And you have to think that way. And hopefully join me in this mission to make sure that we bring some sanity back to this in our country so that we don't have to think that way.